Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so excited to have a conversation today with Paul Larson. You can see him with his colorful background as you're coming online with us today. As you join today, I want to invite you to find the chat panel, and we would love to have a conversation with you throughout today's event in the chat. So I invite you to take a quick moment and tell us where you're calling in from today. Just a quick check-in for the day. Let us know how you're doing, where you're calling in from. And as we do every day, I want to invite you to share something that you're grateful for in the chat. When you do find the chat, I would invite you to please use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees so that we can see all your comments and so that everyone who's participating in today's call can see your comments as well. So welcome to those of you who are just joining us. My name is Becky Robinson. I'm here today with my guest for the day, Paul Larson. I would love to invite you to share what you're grateful for today in the chat. It looks like, Paul, you might be having a little bit of difficulty with your connection. How are you?
Well, first of all, I am fine. Thanks, Becky. And like a lot of people, I think, and a lot of probably folks that work at all the different networking companies, I think we're finding that bandwidth is very different. So I just wanted to make sure I was on the network that I in my place of business here, my home, that is going to give us the best kind of reach. So that's if so if I freeze or anything, that's premeditated, and that's for folks to kind of have a moment to think about what we're talking about.
Well, Paul, I am noticing, at least for me, your video is frozen. So I don't know if everyone's experiencing that. Now you're moving, but I actually thought the connection prior to our getting on live with folks was better. But
Okay.
just a quick moment
Okay.
to acknowledge some people on the call. Erica, I am also grateful for coffee, although I already finished my 2 cups. Joanne, welcome in California, and I'm really grateful that you joined us again. Welcome to you, Jim, in Virginia, and I agree, grateful for friends. And Kristen in Columbia, Missouri, thanks for giving us a shout out. Jane is grateful that she doesn't know anyone personally who has the virus. I'm grateful because I got a card in the mail from Jane, like an actual card, and she sent it to my office, but my coworker picked it up and delivered it, and she gave me encouraging verses on cards. So thank you, Jane. Welcome, Rob in Delaware. For those of you who might want to share some comments from today on Twitter, you can use the hashtag Daily Connection. There was a little confusion at first about whether we were using the Daily Connection or Daily Connection. I think I was the one who liked the Daily Connection. Everyone overruled me. Just use that hashtag Daily Connection. Just a quick moment to introduce Paul as we start our session today. Paul is an executive coach and an author. He wrote the book Find Your Voice as a Leader, and we helped to launch that way back in 2016. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. It's been like 4 years.
And it's a book that's still making a tremendous difference in the world. And now Paul does a lot of traveling and speaking, and that's all a bit temporarily on hold as he is sheltering in place in San Francisco. So what else would you like folks to know about you, Paul, as we get started today?
Well, I thank you so much, Becky, and it's just a wonderful opportunity, and it's wonderful to reconnect with you and your fabulous team at Weave and Influence. You just do so much for our community and so forth. I'm just grateful, and as I sit here and you talk about the traveling, I'm still traveling. It's just I'm traveling up here in my mind, and I'm traveling where I can on Zoom, and I'm traveling wherever. And I apologize if I come in a little frozen or a little pingy right every now and then. Our bandwidths are probably all getting kind of challenged right now. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm just very grateful to be here and to be able to talk to all of us today and learn from each other.
Well, I know we want to talk today on the topic of imposter syndrome, and I'm curious also, Paul, about how you see imposter syndrome coming into play, with this crisis or challenge that we're all facing. So why don't we start with what is imposter syndrome, and why is it important to be aware of it?
Yeah, so that's a great, it's really great. And the background behind me, by the way, the color behind me is purposeful today because this is kind of our brain on imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is that it's when we may feel like a fake or we may feel like a fraud in whatever we're doing, whatever role we might be in, whatever action we're taking. Imposter syndrome could be when we feel we don't belong. Being around and you're seeing people in a very comparative mode and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. So it's not just about self-doubt or lack of confidence. Imposter syndrome can actually be the gap between who you see yourself now and who you think you need to be successful. So it's not just about the improving our confidence, because we can be very confident, but it's really when we get into a scenario or a situation when we think we need to be somebody else, hence the word imposter syndrome. That was coined back in 1978. It's not really technically a medical syndrome at all. It really is all about up here in the mind, managing the mind. So that's just a little synopsis. I live with it. I thrive with it. And that's what I hope to share with all of you today.
Well, and I think it would be interesting to pause and ask folks to tell us in the chat. And even though I typically remind you to use the drop-down menu, if you're not comfortable sharing publicly, feel free to just share to us as panelists. But, Paul, I've been running my own company for 8 years, and there are still times where I run into this imposter syndrome, like, well, I don't want to say that I'm the CEO, like I don't look like a real CEO, like my hair's not good enough, or I'm not smooth enough, or I'm not a CEO, like, and name all my competitors' names out loud. Like I'm
Right,
not as important as he is, or I'm not as important as she is, or my
right.
company's not as whatever. So I'm just saying, yes, I struggle with this, and I'm sure that folks on the call do as well. So if you're willing to share, we would love to hear at what times imposter syndrome might be a challenge for you in your journey as a leader or just as a human. So, and maybe what we can do, Paul, is talk about some of the symptoms. So how would we know if we're experiencing imposter syndrome? How would we know if we're infected?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the good news is here's the good news around imposter syndrome. Up to 80% or more of successful people in all walks of life, in all roles, have admitted to experiencing imposter syndrome at some time in their life. And if you think about it, up to 80% have admitted. So think about the people that haven't necessarily admitted. So we're talking about a good chunk or almost all of the population. You've got people like the late wonderful author Maya Angelou. You've got Meryl Streep. You've got Tom Hanks. You think about what they do in terms of acting and on stage. You got Oprah Winfrey. All these people have admitted to feeling like an imposter. Michelle Obama, just recently, she was talking to a group of high school kids in the last year, and she says, I don't even know what my right is here to talk to you as an expert or somebody about this particular subject, about careers, because she's dealing with imposter syndrome. So it just shows you everybody has it. And it's when we feel like, okay, wait a minute, I don't really belong here. For me, it happened about 20 years ago when I was head of HR at an organization. And even though I had great success, if I look back in human resources, I was now head of HR of a large organization. And I was thinking to myself, they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to find out Paul really doesn't know anything about HR. They're going to find out that he's a fake, or as I mentioned earlier, a fraud. And they're going to do the proverbial tap on the shoulder. This is the other thing about imposter syndrome. We feel like people are going to come up to us and they're going to say, excuse me, Paul, we know that you don't know what you're doing. So we're going to now ask you to leave. I mean, we play all these scenarios out because we feel like we're just a fraud. The irony about that story for me, Becky, was I was in HR. I was heading up HR. So the people that would be asking me to leave would be people from my own team, obviously human resources. So the irony of sort of that was not lost on me. So those are some of the symptoms of imposter syndrome. It's when we may not feel good enough and so forth about a situation, but really like we don't belong, we're a fake or a fraud. Those are like the three triangular points about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, like living in fear that people are going to find out that we're not as good as they think we are. And, you know, lots of comments in the chat of people saying that they identify with this or have experienced this. Interesting comment from Jeff. Fake it till you make it. um, and, you know, maybe it's it's a hard struggle though, and I think sometimes we feel like we're the only ones who feel that way. But it's encouraging what you're saying, Paul, that, you know, 80% of us admit it, maybe many more of us experience it.
Exactly. Or we don't know what it is. I didn't know, you know, to Jeff's point, you fake it till you make it. When I was in that role in HR, I said, well, I have a lot of people that are expecting me to do this role. I have a lot of people that are relying on me. I have an organization. I have team members. We have employees. I've got to figure this out. So there was a level of faking it till you make it. And that's where the confidence comes in. That's why it's not all about lack of confidence. I'm like, okay, I can stand up. I can say these things. I can figure out, I can hire smarter people than me and let them go and learn from them and figure that out. So it is around sort of that. There is an ability of faking it till you make it. And some people may balk at that. Conventional wisdom says, oh, no, 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 you should never do that. That's okay if it's going to get you to the end result of living with imposter syndrome, calling it out, and then really understanding how you integrate it into who you are.
Well, you know, it occurs to me, we had a conversation last week with a woman named Lydia from Design Learning and the whole area of flawless consulting skills. And one of the things that we talked about in that session was that the value in being authentic. And so even like to say it out loud. So maybe as the HR leader, you could say, hey, I haven't figured all this out yet. Or, you know, I'm feeling nervous because I'm afraid you might find out that I don't know as much as you think I know. Like,
Right.
wouldn't it be powerful to hear that from a leader of just like owning and expressing the gaps that we feel? Like, what do you think about that? Can that be valuable, or are we potentially setting ourselves up in kind of showing our fears to others?
Oh, Becky, Becky, in today's world, especially what's going on right now, where we're at with everything and the way kind of life has become kind of topsy-turvy globally, to really show your vulnerability and your humbleness, that absolutely shows that you're a leader of abundance. You're coming from a place of like, I haven't figured this out. I'm going to do the best I can. And here's what my plan is. I'm going to ask for all of us to work together. I'm going to ask for people and we learn from each other. I don't know, but I'll find out. I don't know, but we'll get through it together. Wow. I mean, think about that. We don't have to look very far in the world anywhere where we don't see practices of that in leadership at companies, organizations, politicians, all of that. Think about the vulnerability, the humbleness to come from a place of growth. That's the growth mindset that you just demonstrated, to say, I don't have an ideal about this, but I'm uncomfortable because I'm going to be growing. But we're going to figure this out. Versus the fixed mindset, which is like this, and which is basically coming from a place of fear, which we see all around us right now, which is pointing fingers, and it's saying, you know, I'm fearful, it's punitive, I'm not going to move, I'm rigid, I'm stuck, I'm frozen, all those things from a fixed mindset versus growth. And that's a place of scarcity. So beautiful, Becky, you just demonstrated with those comments the vulnerability and the high level of emotional intelligence that we can show, especially right now, to our community, to our family, to each other, and more importantly, hello, to ourselves. Like, hello, because we have all this going on right now in our brain. We have all of this going on, and we kind of have to come out like this with my hair like this and my bow tie, but I have all of this going on right now. And to really say, I haven't figured it all out, but here's the best, and here's what we can learn from, and I want to learn from all of you as well.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment to panelists only here about there being a fine line between being too open and too closed. So I asked you the question earlier, like, can there be value in us admitting our imposter syndrome to others? Just as well, yeah. So can there be value, and how do we know when we're pushing that line and being too open versus, you know, being too closed off with others? So do you have any sense, Paul, like what's worked well for you?
Yeah, that is that's a great comment. Thank you, Paul. Great name, by the way. In terms of that finesse between too open and too closed, that's the art. So so managing who we are, managing our mind around imposter syndrome and around kind of displaying our authentic self, that's more of an art than a science. The science is we follow these steps, we do this checklist, we communicate this way, we lead this way. But there's an art, which again, back here is really showing us like, what's that finesse? So the answer is, what would you want? You know, if you are in their shoes, if you're in the audience, whatever the audience is, I learned this through my many years of leadership, making tons of mistakes, learning from most of those mistakes. And I'm sure some of them I was still closed up, and also my successes. But I learned to say, okay, I'm serving the audience. That's what I'm here to do. That could be an audience of one. It could be an audience of hundreds. It doesn't matter. What do they want? What would they want? And how do we know that? And so it's constant checking in. It's constant communication. It's constant really empathy, or being empathetic and putting yourself in their shoes. All of those things. And you'll
Sure.
get a sense of that GPS and that direction. This is not about full transparency when that doesn't necessarily always going to play in the best role, to Paul's comment about being too open or too closed.
Sure. Well, I just want to pause for a minute and say I love everyone's openness and the sharing that's happening in the chat. There are some really powerful comments that are coming in, and I love that you're all here with us today, that you're thinking about these topics with us, and that we do have a safe place that we can explore these ideas together.
These comments, Becky, if I may just interject here, the comments are amazing. And I mean, you know, it's like just the learning from these alone can make up sort of a policy, or there's my HR wonk, but a wonderful guide on how we deal with sort of imposter syndrome. John was talking about psychologically safe environments. That's one of the key tenets, right, of a quality manager or leader, is creating a psychologically safe environment that people can learn from. They can make mistakes. It's not punitive. That's just not an organization. That's in our life. How do we do that with our friends? How do we do that with our family? How do we do that in relationships? Because it's not just work, it's all blended together. And are you psychologically safe with yourself? When you make a mistake, and when you do that, do you have the talk up here, how stupid you are, or how dumb that was, or anything like that? So being psychologically safe starts with ourselves. And I just want to say one thing around, there was a study done a few years ago by the National Science Institute that we process anywhere, the average adult processes anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day, you know, and of those thoughts, almost 85% tend to be more negative. The thoughts that we process. That's incredible. And to really think about that. So, I mean, for me, if I can even get like, you know, 1,000 thoughts a day, I think I'm probably doing pretty good. It's about managing your mind and managing your thoughts, because your thoughts create your feelings, which create your experiences, which creates your life, and it creates who you are and how you present yourself and who you are for yourself and others.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. Over the weekend, I had the chance to watch that new Tom Hanks movie about Mr. Rogers. I mean, I'm probably late to the party, right? Everybody saw that months ago. So if you saw it, tell me in the chat. I would love to know. But there were a couple things that I was struck with as you were speaking. One is like, doesn't everybody just want to be Mr. Rogers right now? And to create that kind of like level of comfort and safety for people. But the other part was when you were talking about psychological safety and leaders creating this safe environment, the thing that stood out to me was how the Mr. Rogers character, or maybe that's how he was, Mr. Rogers himself, you know, he would say to people like, I'm so glad to be with you, or you are just perfect the way you are, or I like who you are. And it was so powerful to see that. Have you watched it?
Yeah, it was amazing. And also, I think a couple years ago, there's the documentary as well on his life and just who he was. So you combine both of those things together, and you get such a wonderful, wonderful snapshot of Mr. Rogers. I grew up with him. I grew up, you know, watching his show. And I remember as a kid, Becky, Watching him when he'd come through the door, everything was very deliberate. Now think about this. We have to be deliberate with our thoughts as well. And that's what he was. He would take his coat off, his jacket off very deliberately. He would put on his sweater, which Tom Hanks modeled so well, and button it very deliberately. How many times do we actually ever do that, right? We're just like throwing things on, taking things off. He was very deliberate. And then his communication, his thoughts were all very deliberate. And to me, that was just, it exemplified. We can be so deliberate on the food that we eat, the cars that we drive, the friends that we surround ourselves with, the TV shows or movies that we watch, but how deliberate are we with the thoughts that we have? And what do we let in here? We wouldn't let in half of the negativity probably in our mind, in our TV shows or in our friends, or we wouldn't eat a bunch of food we don't like. So why are
Oh,
we not
I don't
deliberate
know
with our
about
mind?
that. You should have seen me with the Pringles this weekend. I'm not sure who thought bringing home Pringles during this challenge was a good idea.
But you liked them. It sounds like but you
They
enjoyed
were
them. Right,
delicious.
right. And then we can think about like, okay, well, the result of that is what? But in terms of being deliberate with our minds so that we are bringing Pringles in up here, and then they have the actual feelings that we want, right?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, so a really good challenge to all of us to think about how can we be deliberate with our thoughts in general during these times, but also as it relates to imposter syndrome. You know, maybe what we need is some reminders to ourselves. I love, Kitty, that you're giving some encouragement to Erica about this upcoming presentation that she has, like h- kind of that self-talk that we can give ourselves. Um, so I think that we have a question here about what we can do when we get stuck. What can we do to get unstuck or unfrozen? So if we find ourselves drifting into a fixed mindset of scarcity, what can we do to get unstuck so that we can move and pivot to a mindset of abundance and growth?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And there's going to be all different ways of working that, you know, and what works for us. And it's not always just that simple to snap that way, right? And to have the wand to say, oh, okay, great. Now I'm fine. I'm in a place of abundance or growth versus fixed, because we're going to go back and forth because we're human. The one thing I do a couple of things myself, and when I work with clients as well, but the two that work for me is one thing Mr. Rogers talks about, hashtag be a helper. Mr. Rogers talks about in times of any kind of chaos and stress and strife, look for the helpers. There's always the helper. So when I'm in a place of fixed and I'm in a frozen or stuck, I potentially look to pivot to say, how can I help others? How can I do something else? How can I kind of distract this up here to help somebody else? And it could be something so simple. In today's world, there's so many ways that we can help. It doesn't have to be a grandiose gesture, but what can help me help others? And that kind of just is enough to snap me or pivot out of what's going on up here. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, Becky, is or another thing that works for me is acknowledging it. Okay, I am sitting here. I've got the 8-track of imposter syndrome playing up here. And the 8-track dates me back to when I had a bunch of 8-tracks in my car, because the 8-tracks were so structured and they were so like track 1 and track 2. So I always say, okay, that's my imposter syndrome. That's my fear 8-track coming up in here. Acknowledging that and saying, now what can I do to sort of finesse that and move from that? And just usually that thought, that act can do a lot to kind of get us off and move that. Doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be feeling great. And it's not about, this is not about the you know, necessarily the glass is half full or half empty. The glass is half, you know, and it's like what we fill it with then. I want to fill mine with what I can to make sure that I move forward and can better serve myself and my community. So really just sort of that little finesse around what we need to do deliberately.
So two things there. Acknowledge that it's happening. So I can imagine myself saying, okay, here I go. I'm feeling like an imposter right now. So acknowledging that. And then the second is staying focused on others. And it seems like, you know, if we're focused on others and what we can bring to a situation, then we're not going to be thinking about our own inadequacies.
Right.
Instead, we're going to be, you know, thinking about what we can contribute or the value that we can bring.
Yeah, I mean that you know those two things right there, that, and just what you said earlier, kind of admitting at least to yourself, okay, the vulnerability, the I haven't figured this out, and we're in this newness right now of everything going on, and the chaos, and we're seeing all different types of reactions to it, including our own. And you know, it's about not beating ourselves up with a bunch of negative self-talk necessarily, but
Hmm.
just figuring out, like, okay, I'm realistic. Am I scared on some of these things? Absolutely, with what's going on. Am I having a little trepidation? Sure. But what can I do about that? What can I do about kind of setting some path for myself, taking one or two baby steps, because baby steps are sustainable,
Hmm.
to kind of get me out of that, out of those thoughts and out of that track. And that's the key, in terms of everything. There's not necessarily a secret sauce. And you know, Erica says on the chat right now, change is the only constant. Absolutely. I mean, you know, we talk about change and change initiatives and everything, but change is life. That's what we, you know, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with some massive transitions right now, and lots of things going on. And the proverbial tablecloth has been sort of taken away from the table, and some dishes are falling and some dishes are remaining intact. But change is going to be just something within our lives, and how we just are we resilient and agile with that. It's the old how do you thrive in a VUCA environment, right? The volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity in the VUCA world, and how, which is really just life.
Well, and we
That's
thought it was that way before all this, right?
yeah. The universe said, yeah, I'm going to wink at you right now, and I'm going to send some lessons here, and you're going to have to globally look to figure out what you need to do in this. So yeah, we thought we have it all figured out. And isn't it ironic, in a society where we're doing all of these wonderful sort of ways to connect, and then we've got social media that shows all the different connections. I question sometimes how valid and positive all those connections are, or even how worthy, right? But whatever. And then now we actually have to shelter in place and learn some other things, or revert, right, to things that we've already learned, and bring those out in a different way, about how we connect, and how we
Mhm.
trust, and how we respect each other, and how we come together. And so it's quite, it'll be, the lessons are incredible. But for some, it's not so much just the lessons. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I just get through the next hour? And for me too, it's about managing my mind. I love the news as much as the next person, but I filter incredible just how much I look at that, and how I filter it, and not get all triggered, because imposter syndrome is usually triggered by um, scenarios, situations, things that can occur, people where we're at. And I'm just I finesse the triggers. That's all. It's not that I'm not aware of what's going on, and certainly, but I just really finesse my triggers to manage my mind, to be who I am right now, the best I can be, right, in this moment, and then also for the folks that I love in my community and work with.
Well, thanks so much for that. And I appreciate the reminder um, that we can choose how we want to show up through these challenging times. So I have a couple of great offers from Paul to the group today. The first one is that Paul has made a free e-version of his book, Find Your Voice as a Leader, available in 3 different formats, and you can go to his website to access that. I highly recommend it. As I mentioned, we promoted Paul's book, about 4 years ago now, and it's still adding tremendous value to readers. So we invite you to go and get that book today if you have some extra time on your hands and want to get some extra reading done. And like, this is amazing. The first of the series, Paul has a free coaching offer. So if you could use some help getting unstuck, if you would like to explore these topics a bit more, Kelly is putting in the chat a link where you can schedule a 45-minute one-on-one session with Paul. And he was talking before we started the call about a session he did with a couple newlyweds of how to build trust in this kind of lockdown environment of like, hey, we just got married and now we're stuck together, which, that would be an interesting session to have watched.
They were on their couch. I thought we were going to be coaching around leadership and management, which is sort of my, what I work in, what I do in life. And they said, we actually need help. We just got married like 3 weeks ago, and we're now in lockdown. And how do we build sort of trust? And I said, and as I said to you, Becky, I said, Well, the first thing, let's reframe that word lockdown. I don't think that's going to be the best frame of reference for a newlywed couple, or for that matter, anybody, right? But yeah,
Indeed not.
the coaching offer was just, I wanted a way to give back, like so many of us. Again, be a helper. And I coach, right, for a living. I'm honored to do that. I have wonderful coaches in my life. So the 45-minute coaching session is no fee, no obligation, no promotion, and no agenda. It's really just to kind of show up, and we can talk about anything that's on your mind, a reboot, rebrand, retune, or just a recentering.
Well, and that's such a generous offer. And I know you mentioned also that you're just meeting all kinds of great people that way. One of the things I want to put out there is that this webinar environment is a little bit, not the best in terms of all of us being face-to-face and connecting. And on my daily emails, I've been mentioning that we might extend past the original end date of this series, which is set to be April 16th. I have, some other experts who have said they want to join me. So I'm considering extending. And one of the things I want to do before we wrap this series is to do a Zoom meeting for one of them instead of a webinar, so that we all can be face-to-face and interact. I'm seeing some common names come up day after day. You are my people. I'm glad you're here. And it's great that we can share this learning together in times of difficulty. So thanks again, Paul, for joining us today. Thanks for these important thoughts on imposter syndrome. Thanks to all of you who have joined. We will be back tomorrow with a slightly different approach. So tomorrow is a regularly scheduled 1-hour webinar with Bonnie Marcus on strategic networking in a virtual world. That one does require a unique registration. So we encourage you to sign up for that one. It's at a different time even. That one starts at 1 p.m. Eastern. We won't be here at noon tomorrow. We will be here at 1. I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to learn with Bonnie about strategic networking in a virtual world. And then we'll be back the rest of this week with other guests. And yes, I'll be emailing in the morning with the link to sign up for tomorrow's webinar. That is actually me. In many cases, the emails that go out from the company are not me. It is me every morning. I'm getting on. I'm sending you the emails. I promise it's all me. There's no imposter. It's my team serves well, but those are my emails. So thanks a million. Have a great Monday. Take care. And
Thank you, Becky.
any parting inspiration for us? I'll let you have the final word, and then I'll be cutting us off.
I just want to say thank you for everyone here. Thank you for all your wonderful comments and all the great learning. It's all just be a helper to each other, and that's and just live with our imposter, but be a helper to each other and learn from everything we can over the next few months.